We're now more than 4.5 years into Russia's war against Ukraine. That's longer than the First World War and longer than the Soviet Union's fight against Nazi Germany in the Second World War. And unlike that Soviet triumph, this war is shaping up to be remembered as one of the biggest failures in modern history, especially given the two countries involved in the conflict. By almost every measurable standard, this war is not going the way the Kremlin promised its people it would. We're going to walk through the actual numbers, the ones pulled from Ukrainian, Russian and independent Western sources, and lay out just how badly this invasion has gone for the country that started it. Let's start with a number that should end any argument about who's winning this war on the ground: territory. In November 2022, after Ukraine's counter-offensives in Kharkiv and Kherson had already clawed back more than half of everything Russia captured in the opening months of the invasion, Russian forces controlled about 108,600 square kilometers of Ukraine. That's roughly 18% of the country. Now, fast forward to the middle of 2026, and after hundreds of thousands of additional casualties and constant Kremlin claims of liberating Ukrainian towns, Russia controls somewhere around 116,000 square kilometers. That's only about 20%. In other words, in 3.5 years of grinding offensives, Russia has gained less than 2% more of Ukraine's land. And here's the kicker. In April 2026, the Institute for the Study of War recorded that Russia suffered a net territorial loss that month for the first time in the war, if we don't account for the famous Kursk invasion in August 2024, which occurred on Russian soil. The takeaway is that Ukraine's forces took back more ground than Russia's army gained. This didn't last, as Russian forces edged back into marginal net gains by June and July, but for 1 month, the unstoppable Russian advance that Kremlin propaganda has been selling since 2022 simply stopped being true. And it's worth remembering just how differently this war started. In the opening weeks of the invasion, Russian forces seized more than 60,000 square kilometers of Ukraine in a matter of days, racing toward Kyiv itself before being pushed back. That's the scale of advance a full mechanized army is actually capable of when it catches a country off guard. Compare that to what the front line looks like now. Around Konstantinovka, in the fortified belt of eastern Donetsk that Russia spent well over a year trying to crack, Russian forces have been advancing at an average of around 50 meters a day. Near Pokrovsk, it's closer to 70. These are the kinds of daily gains military historians normally reserve for describing the Battle of Somme in 1916, which lasted for over 4 months, introduced tanks into combat, and had territorial gains measured in single-digit kilometers. That campaign became a byword for grinding industrial-scale slaughter for almost no strategic return, and Russia seems to be following suit with some of these advances. To understand just how slow this advance really is, it helps to do the math the way Forbes did back in May 2025. At that point, Russian forces were advancing at a rate of about 176 square kilometers a month. Forbes ran the numbers and worked out that at that pace, it would take Russia 231 years to occupy the entirety of Ukraine. The same analysis suggested Russia would need 100 million soldiers against a total population of 140 million pre-war. But let's update this estimate. Using the Institute for the Study of War's figures for the first half of 2026, Russia advanced a total of about 628 square kilometers over 6 full months. That works out to around 104.5 square kilometers a month, much less than the figure Forbes used a year before. If we run the same calculation today, Russia would need not 230 years, but somewhere in the region of 400 years to occupy the whole of Ukraine at its current pace. For context, that's longer than the time that has passed since the founding of the Russian Empire under Peter the Great. Now, let's talk about the price Russia is paying for those scraps of territory, because this is where the numbers get genuinely staggering. According to Ukraine's general staff, Russian combat losses, killed and wounded, passed 1.45 million by the end of July 2026. July itself was the single worst month for Russian casualties of the entire year, with 42,860 losses recorded. On average, Russia has been losing around 34,000 soldiers a month throughout 2026 alone. Independent Western intelligence estimates broadly back this up. The UK Ministry of Defence, the Estonian Foreign Intelligence Service, the Netherlands Military Intelligence Service, and CSIS in Washington all converge on a figure somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000 Russian dead, with total casualties, killed, wounded and missing, sitting between 1.1 and 1.4 million. To put that in perspective, CSIS points out that Russia has suffered more battlefield casualties than any major power in any conflict since the Second World War. Compare that to the United States, which has lost roughly a quarter of that number across every war it's fought combined since 1945. And there's another important number that helps explain why Russian infantry assaults have started to look the way they do on drone footage. Military analysts citing CIA assessments have put the life expectancy of an inexperienced Russian soldier during a mass infantry assault at just 20 to 30 minutes. This isn't a blanket figure for every soldier at the front. Rather, it refers specifically to the meat wave tactics Russia has increasingly relied on, in which small groups of poorly trained troops are sent directly at Ukrainian positions. Their purpose is often not to break through defences, but simply to draw fire, expose Ukrainian firing positions, and wear down ammunition stocks through sheer attrition. A life expectancy measured in minutes illustrates just how disposable these assault troops have become, and how Russia is increasingly trading lives for marginal battlefield gains instead of relying on coordinated combined arms operations. There's one more point that should worry the Kremlin more than any of this. In 2026, Russia's monthly casualty rate has started to exceed its monthly recruitment rate of roughly 27,000 new soldiers. So Russia is losing men faster than it can replace them, even with record signing bonuses. And the casualty ratio, historically somewhere between 2 and 3 Russian losses for every Ukrainian one, has reportedly widened to as much as 8-1 in Ukraine's favour during the first half of 2026, according to CSIS. Ukraine, for context, has lost an estimated 50,000 soldiers killed and around 400,000 wounded, according to President Zelensky's own July 2026 figures. So, if Russia isn't winning meaningful ground and is bleeding troops at an unsustainable rate, what exactly is driving this collapse in performance? The answer is, as you might have expected, drones. Ukraine has spent the last few years building what is, in 2026, the largest drone manufacturing industry on the planet. In July 2026, President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that Ukraine produces 10 million drones a year, up from a target of just 1 million drones that was announced back in 2023, to widespread skepticism both inside and outside the country. Zelensky has pledged to double that figure again to 20 million a year, with European partners signing on to help fund the expansion. Independent estimates from groups like the Council on Foreign Relations are more conservative, putting the actual 2026 figures closer to 5 to 6 million units. But even that lower figure is a wartime industrial transformation with almost no historical precedent. In mid-2026, Ukraine has more than 450 domestic drone manufacturers, up from just 10 companies in 2022. These aren't just cheap first-person view drones either, though those form the backbone of the frontline kill chain. Ukrainian engineers have built dedicated Interceptor drones, produced by companies like Wild Hornet, specifically to hunt and destroy Russia's own drones out of the sky, something Russia's air defenses have never managed to replicate at scale. Ukraine has stood up the world's first military branch dedicated entirely to unmanned systems, and that branch has reported striking over 800,000 verified Russian targets across the first half of 2026 alone, including personnel, artillery, air defense systems, and logistics vehicles. Ukraine's defense ministry has also credited unmanned systems operations with contributing to roughly 167,000 Russian troops killed or seriously wounded in that time. A figure that would make drones the single deadliest weapon system in this entire war, ahead of everything Russia was actually built around fighting with. After short-range tactics, the development of mid-range and long-range strike campaigns is even more devastating. These campaigns have reached deep into Russia's own economy. In one 2026 strike, Ukrainian drones hit 2 major logistics centers belonging to Wildberries, sometimes described as Russia's answer to Amazon, turning key parts of the company's distribution network to ash. Ukraine has also struck the Kupotnia oil facility, sitting just 10 miles from the Kremlin itself, and reached Russia's largest single refinery at Omsk, more than 2,500 kilometers from the nearest Ukrainian territory. At sea, Ukraine reported hitting more than 100 Russian vessels in the Sea of Azov over a single 9-day stretch in mid-2026, part of a deliberate campaign to sever Crimea from resupply by water as well as by road. None of this happened without Ukraine's drone industry. But the most consequential use of Ukrainian drones in 2026 has been over 1,000 kilometers behind the front line and inside Russia itself. By mid-2026, Ukraine had struck every single one of Russia's 10 largest oil refineries, temporarily disrupting facilities that represented roughly 42% of Russia's refining capacity over the course of the campaign. In June, Ukrainian drones hit 11 separate refineries and 8 defense manufacturing sites in a single month. The International Energy Agency, or IEA, estimated the campaign had knocked out roughly 500,000 barrels of Russian crude processing capacity a day. This is against the estimated total of 6.6 million barrels a day, indicating a direct loss of about 7.7%. The IEA originally projected the disruption would last until at least mid-2026, but that recovery timeline has since slipped even further. By July 2026, Novaya Gazeta Europe reported fuel shortages to all but 5 of the 83 regions in the entire country. Nowhere has this campaign landed harder than Crimea, the peninsula Russia annexed in 2014 and is always treated as the crown jewel of this war. But before we cover the next points in detail, make sure to subscribe to the Military Show to keep up to date with all the news and statistics from the front line. Back to Crimea. In late June 2026, Russian-appointed authorities in the region declared an indefinite state of emergency, directly in response to collapsing fuel, electricity, and food supplies. Ukraine's campaign to isolate the peninsula has been remarkably effective. Traffic along the R280 highway, which is the main overland supply route linking Crimea to the Russian mainland, dropped by 71% in just 2 weeks. Fuel had become so scarce that residents in Sevastopol were queuing for hours just for a chance at a QR code that allows them to buy a Russian 20 litres of gasoline. Reports from the ground describe gas selling for 3 to 4 times its normal price when it's available at all. All of this is putting pressure on the one lever Russian President Vladimir Putin has always been most afraid to pull: mobilization. Russia has avoided a second formal, publicly declared mobilization since the chaotic and deeply unpopular call-up of September 2022, which triggered mass protests and sent hundreds of thousands of Russian men fleeing the country almost overnight. Instead, the Kremlin has relied on financial incentives and ever larger signing bonuses in what was essentially a quiet, informal shadow mobilization targeting men with the least legal or financial power to resist. But the cracks are showing. Ukrainian intelligence and independent Russian outlets have documented street roundups of military-age men in places like Penza Oblast as early as January 2026. Recruitment in Moscow itself is reportedly down by a third compared to the previous year. Zelensky has publicly stated Russia was preparing the conditions for a formal expansion of mobilization in late July 2026, with some estimates suggesting a call-up of anywhere from 300,000 to 500,000 additional troops. The reason Putin has resisted this for so long is simple. Mobilization breaks an unspoken agreement Putin has maintained with ordinary Russians since the start of the war. The deal was that the Russian population just had to tolerate the war happening, and it would happen away from their doorsteps or impact their lives. A second mobilization tears that agreement up. It reaches into households in Moscow and St. Petersburg that have been almost entirely insulated from the war's human cost. This is also exactly why the drone campaign against those two cities has been so politically significant, directly showing just how far Ukraine can reach and how badly Russia is faring against an enemy it was supposed to defeat in weeks. The financial pressure behind all of this is just as severe as the manpower pressure. In May 2026, Russia's own economy ministry was forced to publicly revise down its oil and gas production and export forecasts for the rest of the decade, citing sanctions and the drone campaign directly. Oil exports were projected to fall, while the ministry wouldn't expect exports to recover to even 2025 levels before 2029. And there's one thing that makes Russia's position even more fragile. Russia's Deputy Prime Minister, Alexander Novak, has pegged Urals crude at just $59 a barrel for 2026, and that's despite global oil prices repeatedly spiking above $100 a barrel due to the Strait of Hormuz being closed during the war between the United States, Israel, and Iran. Russia is selling its oil at a steep discount even in an artificially inflated global market. And Russia's own forecast has that price falling further still to around $50 a barrel for 2027 through to 2029. Think about what that actually means. Right now, the elevated global oil price is driven entirely by instability in the Middle East and not by anything Russia has done. That's one of the only things propping up Moscow's remaining leverage over price-sensitive buyers like India and China, the two customers effectively keeping Russia's energy exports alive after Europe cut itself off. If the Strait of Hormuz situation stabilizes and that geopolitical premium disappears, Russia practically loses its ability to command even the discounted prices it's currently getting, and its two remaining major customers gain even more negotiating leverage. But let's circle back to the actual war. For the past 4 years, Russia still has one trump card to rely on: its ability to terrorize Ukrainian cities with ballistic missiles that Ukraine simply can't shoot down. This has become even harder for the other side, as Ukraine has been running critically low on Patriot interceptors, a shortage made worse by the parallel US-Iran conflict draining the same global stockpile. The situation got so bad that President Donald Trump told Zelensky he would grant Ukraine a license to manufacture its own Patriot interceptors domestically. Just a week later, Trump was publicly expressing doubts about actually following through with that claim, citing concerns over transferring sensitive American missile defense technology, suggesting how important Patriot missiles still are in a drone-infested conflict. But through all that, Russia hasn't been able to capitalize on the advantage. Instead, we've seen Ukraine repeatedly push the envelope in terms of making battlefield progress and developing newer and deadlier technology. This can be explained by Russia experiencing an internal shift in ideology and politics. In July 2026, Andrei Melnichenko, Russia's fertilizer and coal magnate and one of the country's wealthiest industrialists, broke a years-long public silence in an extraordinary 60-hour interview with The Economist. Melnichenko isn't a dissident. He's someone whose factories have directly supported Russia's war economy, and he returned to live inside Russia in 2023 specifically because doing business from outside the country had become too difficult under sanctions. And the entire interview could be summed up as a warning to the Russian population. According to him, Russia's elite increasingly sees the war as having reached a dead end, and that a real sense of nervousness was spreading through Moscow as the economic cost of the war continues to mount without any end in sight. Some analysts were skeptical, arguing that an interview this carefully staged and this widely publicized would never have happened without the Kremlin's tolerance. In that sense, it would function more as a controlled pressure valve to guide the carefully sculpted propaganda away from open rebellion and economic ruin the country seems to be in. But interpretation points to the same underlying reality. The war has become expensive and uncomfortable enough that even people who built their fortune serving Putin's Russia felt the need to say something publicly about it. So where does all of this actually leave the war? Russia is capturing territory slower than ever before, barely breaking even in some months for the first time since the war started. It's also losing soldiers faster than it can recruit replacement, at a rate that's made 2026 the single worst year of the war by a wide margin, with monthly casualty records being set and broken month in and month out. Its oil and gas revenue, which was the financial backbone of the entire war effort, has been revised downward by its own government, propped up only by an artificial Middle East price spike that has nothing to do with anything Russia has actually accomplished. None of that means Russia is on the verge of collapse, and it certainly doesn't mean the war is close to over. Putin has weathered worse political pressure than this before. A cornered Putin facing a genuine crisis on the front lines may be even more dangerous, as Putin has repeatedly called for a potential nuclear solution if Russia's own survival is threatened. But the numbers we've walked through today tell a story that's almost the exact opposite of the one Vladimir Putin has spent 4.5 years selling to his own population. This was supposed to be a short, decisive campaign that restored Russia to greatness. Instead, it's become the costliest single war in Russian history, fought for territorial gains measured in single-digit percentages, funded by an economy that is visibly running out of fuel, both literally and figuratively. Now, to learn more about the potential upcoming mobilization that might finally start Russia's collapse, check out this video. And make sure you're subscribed to the Military Show to get the latest news, statistics, and analysis of global geopolitics and warfare.